Y'all know that feeling, don't you? It's good to be here. This is normally the point where I would introduce my family. But as you mentioned, they're not here. And so this is actually a milestone for me. I've never gone to a church without my family before. Specifically, my wife. She keeps me straight on all the dates. And when we come to questions after the presentation, go ahead. Yes. No, that's all right. I rely on my wife to keep me straight. And usually when it comes to question times, she'll say, you forgot to mention this. You forgot to mention this. I have a video. I've done it with audio. I showed it to a church once and sat and watched it. And I thought, I'm never showing that again. Still have the same video, but what I do is I narrate the video. It's a little bit, I think it's more personal. You get to know a little bit more about it. It's about 7 minutes long, and I do not tell everything. So there's a lot of information, some neat things, some history, and some current events. We'll have some questions after the video. As your pastor said, I'm out of Spring Valley Baptist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. Larry Morgan is one of the missionaries out of our church, and I've actually known him since he very first went to the field. I was a member of Calvary Baptist Church in Athens, which sent him out 40 years ago. Yes, I'm that old. It's not quite 40, but it was a long time ago. And it's great to be. I've pastored in Oregon for 20 years. I'm not an Oregonian, though I lived there for 23 years. My dad was a pastor, and we moved up when I was a sophomore in high school. So that got me up there. And then I joined the Navy, and then I went to Bible college. And I pastored in Oregon, went back to Bible college to figure out what I did wrong in the first pastorate. And then I went back and pastored after my dad retired from Cloverdale, Oregon on the coast. Many things about the Dominican Republic and where we're going. Give you some parallels before we get the video started. One of them, where we are going on the northeast side, it rains about 120 inches a year. That's a lot of rain. On the coast of Oregon, where I lived for 16 years total, it rains about 120 inches a year. That's a lot of rain still. We like to say 10 feet of rain. It is very forested on the coast of Oregon. It's very forested, both of them tropical. The big difference is the coast of Oregon doesn't have any cockroaches. I don't know if y'all have cockroaches around here, but that was the greatest thing about Oregon. If anybody says what's so good about Oregon, no cockroaches. It's just such a blessing. There's no poisonous spiders or poisonous snakes in Oregon, and there's none in the Dominican Republic either. We lived about a mile from the beach on the coast of Oregon when I pastored there, and we will live close to the beach in the Dominican Republic. It being an island, it's kind of hard not to live near the beach. Is the video ready? All right, I'll keep talking then. Just wave your hands like this when you're ready. I've done this before. I really have. We've been on deputation since January a year and a half ago, 2 Januaries ago. I resigned from the church in Cloverdale, and then the Lord reminded me that He called me to the Dominican Republic, and I said, okay, Lord, how am I going to tell my wife this? And then when I did tell her, she's like, finally. So it was a blessing to know she was with me on that. I'm going to rewind a little bit and tell you my testimony of salvation, because I sometimes forget to do that. I just take it for granted. But when I grew up, my dad was a pastor when I was born in southern Illinois, and I grew up in church. My teething ring was the back of a pew. I still remember the taste. Anybody else remember the taste of the back of the pew when you're little and you're just that height? It's a nasty, varnished, hand gummy taste, but my mouth waters still thinking about it. He left and went to Bible college in Dallas, Texas when I was 3 years old, so I don't remember much about Oregon except for the pew taste, or Illinois except for the pew taste. In Bible college at Trinity Temple Baptist Church when I was 5 years old, and 6 years old, we learned about God. We went to Sunday school. We went to junior church. We went to a training union in the evening. We went to Bible studies and Wednesday night service, and I went on the bus route and traveled with my dad, and I learned a lot about God. And I'm reminded of what Paul told Timothy, and that from a child, thou hast known the scriptures which are able to make thee wise unto salvation. And that's what happened. I learned about salvation. And one night I was scared, and I knew I was going to go to hell, and I died because I was a sinner. So I went downstairs and I asked Mom, said, I need to talk to Dad. Well, he was working nights because he was going to Bible college during the day. And when he got home from work, he came up and see me, and he said, son, what's wrong? I said, I'm scared. He said, what are you scared of? I said, I don't want to go to hell. He said, well, do you know what you need to do? I said, yeah, I know what I need to do. So we knelt down beside my bed, and I confessed my faith in Jesus Christ. Now, the prayer didn't save me. Faith in Jesus Christ is what saved me. But from that point on, I wasn't scared anymore. I remember I was 6 years old because I was in first grade, and the next day I went to school, and for show and tell, I raised my hand. Being a Winesburgh W, sat in the back of the room in those days, and I raised my hand. She says, what have you got to show us? I said, I don't have anything to show you. I got to tell you something. So I got in front of the class, and I told them I got saved last night. And one of the kids said, what, were you drowning? Tested my Christianity, I just wanted to punch him. But I got to explain. I told them, no, I wasn't drowning. I got to explain to them about being lost and how to get saved in faith in Jesus Christ. And I don't know that it had much of an effect, but whenever you tell your testimony, it does. I didn't get baptized until I was 8 years old because I was a little guy, and I was afraid to walk down that aisle. I was just afraid to. When I was 8 years old, God impressed upon my heart, it's time to get baptized. Don't delay any longer. So the following summer, I was fishing. We talked about fishing a little bit last night. I was fishing on the Nestucca River there in the city of Cloverdale. Okay, town, 300 people, counting cats, dogs, and pigs. But I'm pretty sure they've butchered the pigs since then, so maybe it's $2.99. And I was reading my Bible because it wasn't for bass and it wasn't for catfish. They had trout in the river, trout and salmon. And coming from Texas, I didn't know how to fish for those things. So I had my Bible, and I was reading my Bible while I had the bait in the water, and I felt the Holy Spirit telling me he wanted me to preach. And I'm like, no, my dad's a preacher. You don't want me to preach. And finally, the Holy Spirit kept saying, no, I want you to be a preacher. And I said, okay, I'll make you a deal. You ever make a deal with God? I made a deal with God. If you let me catch a fish, I'll be a preacher. Now, you need to understand on this river, in this particular hole, I always caught a fish. But that day I went back with the bait still on the hook. They have these little fish called bullheads, and they'll bite on a bare hook. But that day, nothing. I didn't even catch a crawdad, nothing. And so I went home thinking, hey, I don't have to be a preacher. A couple weeks later at youth camp, the Holy Spirit dealt with me more and more and more until finally I surrendered to Christ and said, okay, Lord, I'll be a preacher. Just don't ever call me to pastor. I've already told you I pastored for 20 years, so you know how that worked out. Instead of going to Bible college, I ran from God's call to go to Bible college, and I joined the Navy. In Orlando, Florida, I met my wife at a church off base. I was leaning my head against the bus window thinking, what in the world have I done at 4 o'clock in the morning? And we drove by Careen Drive Baptist Church. I didn't know where the church was. I just remember the name Careen Drive Baptist Church. It ended up being 1 mile off base, within walking distance for a sailor. And so out of boot camp, I took 4 guys with me from boot camp. As soon as we were done with boot camp, we walked to church that Sunday morning and went to church there at Careen Drive Baptist Church. And I saw my wife across the room. She came over and shook my hand, beautiful smile. And from that point on, she wanted nothing to do with me. Very smart girl. Until about a year later when I got right with God and surrendered to his will for my life. And then we started dating, and later I wore her down, and she consented to marry me. And we've been married for 28 years, 28 and a half probably. We have 6 kids, not just 3 on the prayer card. I think most of you got one. There's 3 kids on that. We have 6 children. Our oldest is 26 years old, lives in Portland, Oregon, is working there and going to college. I have a 23-year-old daughter, and this is where my wife comes in to keep me straight on the ages. 23-year-old daughter has been married for a couple of years, and we have a grandson. I know you look at me and you think, he's not old enough to have a grandkid. Okay, maybe you don't say that when you look at me. If you saw my wife, you'd think that. No way they can be old enough to have grandkids, but we have one grandchild. His name is Leif Erickson Farstad, great explorer name. I have a 19-year-old son that lives in Eastern Oregon, the city where our first pastor was. And we have, of course, the 17-year-old son that just broke his collarbone that's invincible, still thinks he's invincible until the pain keeps him up at night. 14-year-old son that God blessed, and he just started playing football for a private school down in Fort Worth while we're on deputation. That's a blessing because he loves football. And then 11-year-old daughter, which has me wrapped around her little finger. I'll just say it out and open and public. Are we ready for the video yet? Okay, it's the projector. All right, then I'm just going to go without a video. I tell you what I'll do. I brought my Surface Pro, and I will set it out on the display between Sunday school and church. I'll set the Surface Pro up, and I'll set the video playing on that. So if you go out and look at the display, you'll be able to see the pictures. But now I get to tell you what's in the video without the pictures. This is a first. This is a Sunday of first. A lot of firsts right now. I'm almost tempted to grab that so I could look at it. Actually, I'm going to do that if you don't mind. Because even though I've done this 100 times or more, I look at this and it's different every time. So I'll use the video cues off of this, and I'm not going to tell you everything like, yes, we're the Winesburghs, we're going to the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is it's on the island of Hispaniola, which is the second largest island in the Caribbean. It has the third largest population behind Haiti, which is on the same island, and Cuba, which is the other largest island. If you were to pull up a map on Google phone, Google Earth or whatever, you'll find there's a peninsula in the northeast corner. It's on the back of our prayer card. You'll see that peninsula as well. There are 250,000 people on that peninsula, and there are no Baptist churches. In the city of Los Terrenos, where we are going, there's a population of over 40,000 people. There are no Baptist churches, and there are about 6 or 7 churches altogether. There's 2 Methodist churches there. There's some Assembly of God churches. There's a Seventh-day Adventist, and the other is Assembly of God and Pentecostal-style churches, a small Catholic parish. The Dominican Republic is about 95% Catholic by demographics, and the other 5% covers everything. The good thing about this peninsula, it has been isolated in time over the years. They got electricity in 1994. They got running water in 1997. Most of the Dominican Republic, you cannot drink the water. 1/3 of Los Terrenos, the water is drinkable. Nobody knows which third it is, and nobody drinks the water. But every time there's a storm with a lot of rain, like a hurricane or tropical storm that comes by, they shut the water off. It's not just the power going out. They shut the water off because they have to redo all their filters and clean the whole system out. I mentioned 1492 earlier in a conversation, I think. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. There, you'll remember that, right? Columbus landed on the island of Hispaniola. He tried to land on the area of this peninsula. It became known, the Samana Bay became known by Christopher Columbus as the Bay of Arrows. In Spanish, you know how the words for that. I haven't memorized it. It became known as the Bay of Arrows because the native Indians on the island were shooting arrows at them, would not let them land there. So they went around and landed at Santo Domingo. And then the Spaniards later took over the island. They made slaves of the native people. The French came and landed on the Haitian side, and they brought in Haitian slaves, they brought in African slaves. Haiti was the richest country in all of the Caribbean under French control. But when they got their independence and ran the French off during that Great Rebellion, the slaves rose up and killed every white person in the area in Haiti. All the white people were killed. Even if they sided with the slaves, they were white, and so they were killed, and all the land was taken from them. The Dominican Republic has been under Haitian control. It's been under French control. It's been under Spanish control. It has been under American control for 10 years, about 10 years in the early 1900s. It was a territory of the United States until one of the presidents came along and said, we can't do any better than they can do themselves, and we abandoned it. I believe also in the 1940s, we stationed ourselves also on the island to help quell an uprising that was going on there. Christopher Columbus, I mentioned he landed there. Let me get my video going again because I'm not going along with it. It is the only nation whose flag has a Bible on it. It's opened up to John chapter 8, verses 31 and 32. It'll sound familiar. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In the island that you have 400, in Santo Domingo, you have 400-year-old buildings right next to modern buildings. Population of Santo Domingo is about 2.5 million. Every community, every city has a city park with a gazebo of some sort, something probably similar to what your Riverwalk area is down here by downtown. And people meet and gather there on a regular basis, especially in the cool of the day. And usually there's an ice cream vendor nearby because it is hot. It's a great place to meet people, a great place to hand out tracts, and on occasions we can rent out some time in that gazebo and have open air church services. Schools, they have public schools which cost about $300 a year. The schools look like prisons with walls, barbed wire, and uniforms. So I know I grew up thinking my school was like a prison, but it wasn't that bad. A lot of people think the number one export the Dominican Republic has is baseball, and that's pretty close. There are a lot of Major League Baseball players that come from the Dominican Republic. Every Major League team has a camp down there northeast of Santo Domingo. It's beautiful. I'm spent a lot of time in Texas, 18 years. I'm a Texas Rangers fan, and they've got the newest and greatest, best state-of-the-art camp down there. My son has been looking to how in the world can he go to that camp, but he's not Dominican, so there's a good chance he won't. But baseball is not the number one export. I believe it's either coffee, sugar, tobacco, or gold. I think gold is the number one export. They have the world's second largest gold mine. They have some villages in the sugarcane field areas, and they're Haitian immigrant villages in the sugarcane fields. And one of them that we got to visit was Bate 106. Bate, B-A-T-E-Y, that's what they call them. The land is owned by the sugarcane landowner, but they have legal rights. They can never be kicked off the land. One of the poorest Bates was Bate 106. But ironically, it is also the first Baptist church in the Dominican Republic is in Bate 106. The faith came over with the Haitian immigrants to the Dominican Republic. The first American missionary didn't go to the Dominican Republic until the 1940s. And the area of Samana, this peninsula, there has still been no missionaries take the gospel there. I mentioned Las Terrenas specifically a little while ago. It's a population of over 40,000 people and only has about half a dozen churches of any kind. So the fields are definitely white unto harvest and wide open for us to go and minister the gospel to them. I have pictures of motorcycles. Third world countries, they love their motorcycles. They're usually 125 to 150 cc or less. And the conchos are the scary guys that drive up and say, hey, do you want to ride? And I'm not getting on a motorcycle with anybody unless I'm the one driving it. But that's just what they do. In Las Terrenas, they wear these safety vests so you know, and they have a number so you know that they're definitely the conchos. Las Terrenas itself in the 1940s, I think it was about 1949, Governor Trujillo, or Dictator Trujillo, whichever way, they call him governor. He was a dictator. He took a lot of the poor people off the north side of Santo Domingo, the poor farmers, and he moved them up to Las Terrenas to establish a city there because he wanted political control of the peninsula. At that time, it was under Haitian control, but a lot of American and British influence. On that peninsula, out on the end, is the city of Samana. It's a population of over 100,000. It was a British slave trading port. Las Terrenas was a poor fishing village, but it had, after the Civil War, two Quaker women hired a ship to take freed slaves back to Liberia. It shipwrecked off the coast of Las Terrenas. Almost everyone survived. And today we have grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those slaves that are in Las Terrenas. And so they spoke a lot of English. The British slave trading port, they spoke a lot of English. Governor Trujillo established a city and outlawed English to be spoken. He wanted control of that area of the island. And they would publicly beat people for speaking English, but a lot of people still have it. In Las Terrenas itself specifically, in the public schools and private schools, they teach Spanish, French, and English. French, because in the 1970s, a man from France came over and built a hotel. Now half the population of Las Terrenas is French. If you were to go to Las Terrenas, just looking at people, you would see people you thought were American, except some of the Frenchmen have the ponytails that they put in the man buns or the unmanly buns, however way you want to look at that. And you'll see them quite often. Europeans have settled there. The airport near Las Terrenas has flights from Canada and France. You can't get a direct flight to Las Terrenas from the United States without going through Canada because that French European influence, it is unlike a lot of the other cities in the Dominican Republic. Some people say, well, it is a resort town. It is to a point, but most of the resort towns you go to, you'll have all-inclusive resorts around walls, and it's not like that. It's more of an Airbnb type rent a room or rent a hotel room close to the beach, close to the mountains. In the early 2000s, the population of Los Therenos was less than 10,000 people. In 2012, the population was 40,000 people. Okay, and we're 7 years later, so the population could quite be much higher than that. They're not as detailed with their census as the United States is. That and a lot of Europeans left because of COVID-19, because the restrictions that were on them, they decided to go back to Europe. I don't know how they make those decisions, but it really lowered the housing prices. So when we get there in January, we won't have to pay so much in rent. So we're kind of looking forward to that. Francisca and Patrick are two people that we met when we were in the Dominican Republic in Los Therenos. They're from Los Therenos. He's a Frenchman. She is one of the descendants of the freed slaves after the Civil War. They left for work to go to San Francisco to Macorís. They met a missionary there, a Baptist missionary. They got saved and they got baptized. And now they moved back to Los Therenos, and they have no church to go to. So when we get there to start the Spanish-speaking ministry, we will be working with them specifically right off the bat. We've got people to work with. And they've already helped us to taking us around town and showed us various things and what neighborhoods not to live in, which is, that is golden right there. It's where I was going to live there. I thought, oh, Comey Pound, that little section neighborhood, that'd be great. And they're like, no, that's where all the drug people live. So we're not going to live in Comey Pound. Also, I got onto a Facebook group just to kind of keep an eye on what's going on in the city as we prepare to go there. And there are 3 American families I know of personally that I've talked to that are there. One of them just recently moved last month, the doctor and his family from Birmingham, Alabama. And they specifically asked the question on this group, are there any English-speaking churches? With the Canadians, they speak French and English, and there's a lot of Canadians, the expatriates that are down there. There's more than a dozen American families that are expatriates that are down there. But specifically, we've identified 6 families that are looking for an English-speaking church right now. So for us, I'm like, I told him what the religious scene was down there, that there's no English-speaking churches. A guy that's a retired Lutheran, or retired in Lutheran, said, hey, let's start one. They haven't started it yet because of COVID restrictions. They may start something before we get down there, but for me, this is a golden opportunity to get there and start, get a Baptist church started and get established in the community. I don't know how that's going to happen. When we go in January, we're going to go to language school about 3 hours away. And we thought, well, we could work on starting an English-speaking church on the weekends. But actually, when you're in language school, you need to be learning the language, not speaking English, but as we were talking last night, to be totally immersed in the language. So we're excited to see what God's going to do. The fields are definitely white unto harvest, and we're anxious to get there. My video stopped, and I kept talking. So y'all didn't know that, did you? It happens all the time, don't worry. Do you have any questions? I didn't tell you everything. Any questions? Anybody? Yes, sir. The biggest obstacle is going to be very similar to what we would face in America, and that is people's preconceived ideas of religion, especially in Los Therenos, and I mentioned this other missionary that in San Francisco de Macorís. When he went there 11 years ago, there was no Baptist church in a city of 250,000. And he said his problem was, I'm a Baptist, and they had no clue, no frame of reference as to what a Baptist was. So he had to explain that to them, and so he dialed that back and stopped explaining that to them, and then until they got saved, and then in part of the discipleship, he explained what a Baptist was. Culturally, it is extremely diverse. As I mentioned, there are American families there, there are French families there, European families, Canadian families there, and they're bringing all sorts of different cultures into this mix, and they tend to culturally isolate themselves. So you'll have the Germans over here, and they get together, and the Americans get together, and the French and Canadians get together, and they isolate themselves by language. I didn't say language is going to be a problem because we visited there. I've spent about 3 weeks there so far, and with a limited Spanish, I was not unable to do anything. We had no problem going to a restaurant. We had no problem going to a grocery store. The cultural differences is usually the things that missionaries talk about, and because it's so culturally diverse, it's really going to depend on which group we're ministering to. The Spanish-speaking people, when God called me, I thought, well, that's who we're going to minister to, and that is our predominant ministry. We want to minister to the Spanish-speaking people because that's the majority of the people. But we're not going to limit who we minister to. I took French in high school and college. I know enough French to get in trouble. I didn't take Spanish. I'm working on that. I have a bigger vocabulary in Spanish, but I speak French easier. And when we were down there, I spoke French to a guy at a restaurant. And he got so excited, he came over to give me a hug because I spoke French. And I was like, no, I don't speak that much French. Of course, I said it in French. So I know enough French to get in trouble. I know enough Spanish to stay out of trouble. But the hearts of people there is, because of the European influence that is in Los Terrenos, they are very humanistic in their thinking and their dealing. And if you come in strong Bible, they're going to say, well, the Bible says you can't do this, you can't do that, and we don't think that's right, and they'll shun you. Which, same issues you have in the United States. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Cost of living in the Dominican Republic as a whole is very cheap. But in Los Terrenos, because of the Europeans, they've run up the prices. Usually when I go to a town, I'll go to the grocery store, and so I can compare the cost. And then I went to Florida, and it was more expensive in Orlando and Tampa than it was in the Dominican Republic for food. And I'm like, well, that's not a very good example. The cost of living, housing for a 3-bedroom house right now is going to be around $1,200 a month for a decent house in a good community. That's gone down because a lot of the Europeans left because of COVID. It may go back at the start of the year. It may go back up. Food, for instance, milk is going to cost about $7 a gallon, but it's not like the milk you have here. It's dehydrated, reconstituted, put in a wax-coated carton set on a shelf, not refrigerated. Wild bananas are cheap, pennies. Coconuts, if you catch the guy that's driving through town, or not coconut, pineapple, catch the guy driving through town, they're 2 for $1. And they were ripened on the plant, which is totally different than what you buy in the store that was picked 2 weeks ago. So the fruits that you buy in those things are cheap. Meat is expensive. But then I went to the grocery store down in Fort Worth, and I think I paid $5 for ground beef. I'm not used to paying $5 for ground beef, so for me that was expensive, but that's about what you would pay in Los Terrenos when you could find ground beef. Most of their beef is grass-fed. They don't have feedlots like we do, so it's not marbled with that juicy fat, and it tastes different. So seafood's cheap. Gas is about $4 a gallon. I don't know if that's good or bad. 50 pesos, 50 Dominican pesos to $1 US. And that is gone up. I've seen it 43 to 53 in the last several years. We've been right around 50 on average, which, when exchange rate goes down, that makes a difference. When I've been looking at vehicles and houses, and a lot of that stuff is like 600,000 pesos. And I'm like, whoa, that's a lot until I do the math. It's still a lot. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Right now, if you're coming into the country, you have to be tested before you get there and test negative within 5 days, or you could test when you get there, and the government will quarantine you for 5 days. But everybody I've talked to says they don't know where they quarantine you at. I don't know. When they first closed everything down in Los Terrenos, you weren't even supposed to be out on the beach walking by yourself with nobody around. And so they have 2 different police departments. One of them is the national police or state police, and the other is a tourist police in Los Terrenos. And they drove a truck down the beach and had everybody that was walking by themselves get in the back of the truck, and they took them all back to the police departments, no mask or anything, gave them tickets for not isolating. But there was 2 kids standing on their front porches talking, and they both got arrested and hauled to the police station because quarantine, they were supposed to be inside their house. Their stay-at-home orders were extremely strict and didn't make a lot of sense. They've started opening up Santo Domingo, the capital city. They didn't even want you traveling between cities. Las Terrenas, up until a month ago, only had 2 cases. And they were both, one was Italian, one was French, and they got rid of them really quick. So they didn't have any cases at their hospital. But as they started lightening up restrictions, people that had vacation homes from Santo Domingo started traveling. And last I heard, there's about 40 cases in Las Terrenas. So they are easing restrictions, but I'm not going yet. When we went to Alaska in first week of June, and they had just opened up restrictions for us to go travel up there and visit churches on deputation. We had to get a negative test within 3 days, which we did. We only had to quarantine for 2 days while we waited for the results, and they came back negative. I don't know. It's a different world we live in. They are opening back up slowly. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Right now, the youngest 2, Courtney and David, will be going with us. Jonathan has graduated high school, and he went down. He's joined us on deputation for a while, but he's going to go to Bible college, Independent Baptist College, take classes there at our home church. And then he says his plan, which I'm giving him flexibility to change because he's got a girlfriend and it'll probably change. But his plan is to go to Bible college for a year, join us for a year, and then go to the Coast Guard. So I don't know if he's going to join us for a year or not. But as of right now, just the 2 youngest ones have that privilege and blessing of being uprooted and taken to a foreign country. We took them down. They were not doing well. Of course, having 6 kids and a close family, when we left Oregon last July, we uprooted them from their siblings. And the older siblings were very upset that we were doing that, and the younger siblings fed off of that. Our oldest daughter said, "You're leaving home, I'll show you. You're going to have a grandbaby and not be around." It was a vengeance. I think they should have named him Vengeance, but, they didn't ask me, honestly. In March, we had a few weeks in between where I didn't have appointments, and we were in Florida, where my wife is from. And after selling our house, we had some extra money, so we took the youngest 2 down to the Dominican Republic for 2 weeks, and they fell in love with it. And Courtney and David are both very excited about it right now. Of course, David, now that he gets to play football, he's really excited about that more than going to the Dominican Republic. But they're excited about it. They're praying with us about getting support, and they're more active in that and excited about going and the possibilities that will come in their life. They are concerned about having friends, but no, not at all. In fact, when we go, before we go, actually next month, today's August, in October, we're going to start the process of getting our residency. We can never be citizens, and I'm okay with that, but residency allows us to do business a lot easier. And right now, any American can go there on a tourist visa for 30 days, leave, and then come back. They haven't ever enforced that, but knowing me, they would. And in 31 days, they're going to catch me. So, but basically what they do is when you leave and you try to come back in, they'll flag it and you can't come back in. And you don't get refunds on your airplane ticket when they do that either. So we're going to get residency, so there's no restriction on how long we're down there without having to leave. We're going to do it all the way down to David. We're going to hold off on Courtney for now. In order to get a Dominican driver's license, you have to have residency. And so David, being 14, he turns 15 in December. He's going to want to drive down there. I don't want him to drive, but he's going to want to drive. So, there's in the Dominican Republic, there's no restrictions on children having to come back. And actually, when we went down from Orlando, I think our plane tickets were $147 a piece round trip, and that was before COVID. So it's not that difficult to make that trip back and to come back down. Courtney says, I mean, of course, she's 11 years old, but she's already thinking she'll never leave. Yeah, I let her think that. Chaotic. chaotic, very aggressive. As with most third world countries, as various missionaries I've talked to, you get out in the United States. I drove 11 hours yesterday. I think it was 1,000 miles from Fort Worth to up here. It was probably more because I made some wrong turns and Google let me know about it. But it's kind of relaxing to just get out there, listen to a book. But down there, it is combat. You know, you are constantly looking and people are cutting you off. And I think there are stop signs in Los Terrenos and a stop light, but nobody obeys them. It's kind of, you just stick your nose out. They got these huge speed bumps. We found out that's where you cross the street as a pedestrian because they're big enough that people slow down. Even the motorcycles slow down when they come to those. So you go, 20 yards down, watch the traffic, and that's where you cross the street. But it is crazy. We rented a motorcycle for a day. It cost $25 to rent a motorcycle for a day. And all the traffic converged, and I could not slow down or stop, and I just threaded the needle and kept going. And my wife was saying, man, we should have videoed that part. I'm like, I don't want to relive it. Any others? I didn't do that good of a job, did I? We're about 55% right now. And we are praying for, on average, we need 22 more churches and then we can go. January. Not just a goal, it's a plan. I presented it to our home church about 4 Wednesday nights ago. I presented to them. In February, my wife approached me and she says, I'm praying we get 10 churches in the month of February. And I'm like, we've been doing maybe 2 churches a month getting support, even though we're visiting 10. We've been getting support from 2 churches a month. And so I just kind of blew it off. And then about halfway through the month, we had gotten 3 churches. And I said, okay, I'm going to start praying that we got 8 churches in the month of February. When it was all said and done. And so that was really convicting for me because she kept going. I think it's in Matthew chapter 19, if 2 agree on anything. And I'm like, okay, I'm with you on this. And so we laid out before our church to get, at the time, I think it was 25 churches that we needed so we can go in January. And I laid it before our church and I said, pray with us about this. God answers these prayers. And so by faith, we're planning to leave in January. I believe God's going to do it, and we'll get the support we need so we can do it by January because I've seen He can do so much more. And it's just, I'm not going to be up here and say we're going without the support. I'm not going to do that, but I think I have faith in God that He's going to do it by January. And I've been a pastor for 20 years, and I've heard missionaries get up and say things like that, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. And now I'm that guy. Because God's shown me some things and I've walked through some things with God that I know He is abundantly able to do exceedingly above all that we ask. And He can. So we're planning on going in January. When we do finish our residency, if we do it before we get there, we have 90 days to get there. So, any other questions? Well, it's 10 minutes till 11. Is this where I turn it over to you? All right. Thank you.